Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is help me to rewrite my inner story, whatever that looks like. And so when we think about the story that we're living, we have to think about where it came from, because the reality is you're not the story that you've been telling yourself. We're really going to focus this week on how to identify your old narrative, how to reframe that narrative, and to step into the life that you were meant and designed to be living. And to understand that it only starts with one small story at a time. And so many of us think that the story that we've been told about ourselves, the story that we're living, the story that has shaped our lives is the truth. But that story came from somewhere. And we carry those stories about who we are that were written in our childhood, that weren't written by us, that weren't told to us by God, but that were embedded in us in childhood, downloaded into us in childhood. And we've either shaped a survival story from what was told to us, or we continue the narrative of the thing that was given to us. And these narratives shape our behavior. They help us to identify who we are or create an identity inside of that story. And some of them are great. Some of them are stories that have been told to us that are helping us to create successes. Some of them are stories that have been told to us that are helping us to become resilient people. But some of the stories are limiting our ability to be who we were truly called to be. And we can rewrite the story, and we can find freedom in that rewritten narrative, and we can thrive as a result of it. But first, we have to determine what part of our story has been shaped and molded by other people. Because even when you think about yourself, there are things that you probably speak into your friends or your kids or people that you're in relationship with that just come innately, right? So if someone comes to you and they're asking for advice, and you give them that advice and you tell them who you see them as. And or if your kid is having a rough experience and you have a conversation with them and you tell them who they are. Like for my son, sometimes he gets scared of things, or he starts to overthink and ruminate in the overwhelm of what could happen. And I tell him, you're brave and you're courageous, and God created you to be that way. And those are the things that I am speaking into him, so that the narrative that is created for him is one of courage and bravery, and so that he walks in that. But oftentimes things are told to us and downloaded in us that aren't who we want to be, are things that we want to shed. And frankly, they were never really who we were in the first place. So if there is something that you're contending with in your adulthood, and it's, I'm not enough, I'm too much, I'm stupid, I could never do that, I don't have any confidence, etc. Our job as a grown-up is to investigate where those stories started. Much like when you go to your social media timeline and or your feed, when you look at those stories, you have to find the source, because a lot of times you'll get two opposing stories about the same subject, and you have to find which one is the truth. And that's true about the narratives that we are given about ourselves as well. There may be some people in your formative years who thought that you were a lot of these things, but you have to investigate to see if that's actually true. Some of them may be true, but some of them may be created and written for you, and you just inadvertently became the aftermath of being told that for so long. Because if you tell someone the same narrative for years and decades on end, they'll start to believe it even if it isn't true. And so when you look at the science behind this research, our self-concept is heavily influenced by the stories that we internalized in our early experiences. So when we were younger and we were told, the stove is hot, we believed the stove was hot without ever actually having to touch it because we were told so many times that the stove was hot. That same concept is true of the narratives that you tell yourself about yourself. If you've been told for so long that no one wants to hear what you have to say, then eventually you're going to learn to silence yourself, even if you think that what you have to say in the conversations that you're having inside of your head is valuable and important because you were taught that it's not. And just the way that you believe that the stove is hot without ever actually having to touch it, you'll believe that you're not valuable in conversation and in thought without ever actually having to have conversation with other people to get that litmus test for yourself. So we have to access the early narrative. We have to figure out, when was I told that that was true? When was I told that I couldn't? When was I told that I was in this box that has been crafted for me? And the origin is important because you can't investigate the truth and figure out why that exists in you until you know where it came from. And oftentimes when you investigate the truth, when you start to try to figure out why that narrative ever existed about you, you'll find that people gave you that narrative in an effort to keep themselves comfortable or safe. So sometimes you'll have a parent who's easily overstimulated who tells their child that they're getting on their nerves, and that child feels like they're a nuisance and a burden, so they stop bothering the parent altogether, and they won't talk to them about anything, they won't express anything to them, and then the whole time in their childhood, they're not sharing with adults what's actually going on with them. Was the child ever obnoxious? Probably. But the reality of that whole concept is that the parent was probably just overstimulated. And so in an effort to keep themselves safe, in an effort to keep calm around them because they can't find calm inside of them, they silence their children, they tell them to go sit down somewhere, and they don't want to be bothered by them. But that shapes a narrative for the child that they're saying it to. And that could just be the narrative that you're carrying around with you today that isn't true. If you hold on to that narrative, the science shows that those limiting narratives create self-fulfilling prophecies and reinforce your old survival patterns. So even if you hate the narrative that was being told to you, you hate that you feel that to be true about yourself, because you've been told it for so long, and because when things happen in your life, that narrative still plays in your head, you actually become what you keep replaying. So if you tell yourself, oh, I'm too much, I shouldn't involve myself in this conversation because people are going to be annoyed by me or burdened by me or anything that's in alignment with that, you actually will overthink it so much that when you get in conversation, you'll fumble over your words and you'll feel like you were an annoyance to the people, and you'll become the very thing that you told yourself was true, because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You've told yourself it for so long that you actually do the thing that you were trying not to do because you no longer want to be that person. But it's a comfort to be able to rely on the old survival patterns that you've created, because it's the devil that you know. You know how to play that role. You know how to respond when the situation says that you are that person, because it's what you've always heard and it's what you've told yourself, and now you're feeling it in this situation, so you know exactly what to do to create your safety inside of those environments. But if you no longer want to identify with that narrative, and you no longer want to feel that way when you walk into those spaces, then something has to interrupt the pattern, or the pattern persists. So you have to rewrite your story, and rewriting your story is going to change your perspective. It's going to change your emotional response to situations, and eventually your behavior will change over time. And it's not about a complete overhaul. If you've listened to my pod for some time, you know that I don't believe in complete overhauls. Complete overhauls tend to become too overwhelming and have you resorting back to the same patterns that you're used to because it feels like it is impossible to do the overhaul. But tiny steps, small rewriting of the narrative can help you to change your perspective, change your emotional response to those situations, and thus change your behaviors. But you have to first decide that you're going to rewrite that story. And it's not easy to do when you're, at this age and you've heard for decades that those things are true about you. It's not easy. It's not easy to only feel value in transactional relationships because you've been told that your value exists in what you do for other people. And so when you get into this space in life that you no longer want to be used or feel like you have to do so much to gain people's approval, it's hard to rewrite that narrative that if I'm not doing something for somebody, then I'm still valuable. But the tiny shifts in rewriting your story are what are going to change that emotional guilt and shame that you'll feel so that your behavior is that you no longer feel guilty for not doing everything that everybody asks you to do because your identity has been shaped around how transactional those relationships were and how much you do for people. But you'll be in a space where you can actually believe that even when you say no, you still hold value regardless of the perception of the people that you're saying no to. So those stories have to be rewritten in order for those patterns to be interrupted. And though it's not an easy thing to do, it does take you integrating some cognitive reframing in there, integrating some somatic awareness in there, so that the new story happens both in mind and body. So when you feel yourself telling yourself those stories of old, when you feel that narrative start to play in your head because you've pressed play on it when the scenario seems the same, you have to be able to interrupt those thoughts so that you can interrupt all the rest of the pieces of the pattern. So if you feel yourself saying, oh, if I don't do this, then they're going to be upset with me and then they're not going to think that I'm of value, you have to stop that conversation and say, I no longer want to think that. So they may be upset with me, but I still hold value no matter what I do for the people around me. And eventually, the way that you listened to that narrative in your past and started to believe it, you'll listen to the narrative that you're recreating and start to believe that too. The other part of it is feeling it in your body, and that's where you have to be really aware of the somatic changes in your body when you start to feel your shoulders tense up or tighten, using your breath work, closing your eyes, praying, taking those deep breaths, grounding, going outside and putting your feet in the grass. All of those things help your body to reframe what it's going to do in those situations. I've told you the story about the courtroom probably way more times than I should have, but that is my experience with what your body does even when your brain knows something different. So in that abusive relationship, my body responded with violently shaking. My teeth chattered and my hands shook and my body just shook all over because I had fear. And even when he was no longer a threat to me, like in the courtroom where there are, officers all around us, my brain knows that, but my body still did the same thing. And it wasn't until I started to calm my body that my brain and my body could align with each other and in tandem rewrite the narrative of that situation. You are safe. He cannot hurt you. You are loved and you are protected. And I had to tell myself every time I was in a space with him. And eventually, when I started to breathe through it, my body caught on to it too. So both your mind and your body have to be able to do this in tandem, because sometimes when your body responds the same way, then your brain will start to believe the experience of your body. And when your brain still continues that narrative, your body will just follow suit with what it's always done. This may feel really difficult because you feel like you're stuck in that pattern. Because sometimes we just do things off presets, right? We just autopilot the things in our lives because it feels less overwhelming. You are not stuck living as the character you have been conditioned to believe that you are. The person you are and the person that you believe yourself to be right now is the person that you're allowed to be. Getting rid of those narratives will help you to get out of that stuck cycle, but we have to disrupt them. Because freedom truly comes when you recognize that you and God are the author of your story and no one else. So when you start to realize that people have their own stories and their own intentions with their stories and their own reason for creating your story, and you start to investigate and question that, you'll understand the reason that they created that narrative for you. And that gives you even more purpose to take that pen and rewrite the story. Your authority comes back when you start to understand that the reason that they created that narrative for you in the first place is because it benefited them somehow. And that now you're allowed to say, God, I've lived my life this whole time being who they said that I was, listening to the conditioning of the narrative that they have placed upon me. And now I want to know who you created me to be, what story you crafted me to enact. And I want to, alongside you, rewrite that story so that I am no longer the character that they have created for me. You know, there are so many times where I have done this, and there are so many times that I've shared with you where I've done this. But it's interesting to note that it still happens to this day. And I sometimes have to have a conversation with myself afterward to say, okay, here's what you did and here's what happened as a result of that. And it's okay because you're going to do something different next time. And so the narrative that I have shared with you often is that I always felt like I was kind of like an outcast / burden / too loud / not enough. There were just all of these being wasn't valuable. Like there were all these other things that I had to do. And that no longer served me as an adult because I needed to be able to intuitively be who I was created to be, because I believe that the giftings that are around me need that person in them. But even today in church this morning, the pastor spoke a really great message, and he had mentioned before the message that it was written to be an 1.5-hour masterclass, and he had to do it in, 38 minutes or whatever it was because of the time frame that he's given for church. And while we were standing there having the conversation, I felt like there were things that I wanted to say to him. And so I said the things, because sometimes we go to the other polarity of being silenced to now I need to say the things. And so you advocate to say the things. And there wasn't anything wrong with saying the things. But what happened, and the things were beautiful things. I was like, I really need the cliff notes for that 30 plus minutes that you had to pull out of it, because the message was so good that now I want to know what you edited out, because I'm sure that was, super beneficial for us to know as well. And so, he was saying maybe he'll record it, but I was like, I'm definitely going to send you a DM and ask for those cliff notes. And so it was kind of like because, I'm sarcastic and funny, but also there was some truth behind it, because the information was just so good. And I love the series that we're in. And then there was another time where my fiance was telling a story, and he was telling the story, but he was quoting me. So I interrupted him a little bit to tell what I actually said in the story, not to correct him, but just to, give the part that I said the exact words. And so anyway, when we left the church, I felt myself ruminating on that conversation and saying things like, oh my gosh, she probably thinks that you interrupt too much. She probably thinks that, you're constantly having something to say, or that, you didn't even let your fiance talk. And I literally started to just downward spiral and all these assumptions that I was making about his perception. And that was today. After all the work that I've done, that was still today. Now, my body didn't do the thing that it always does because I stopped the thought. And the work is not in eliminating the narrative altogether and eliminating the thoughts, and you're only healed if you do that. The process is the beauty. There's so much beauty in the process of being able to say, nope, I have the authority to interrupt this thought and I'm going to. So I stopped the thought and I said, you don't know what was happening in his brain. Perhaps he thought that what you were saying was insightful. Perhaps he thought it was funny. So yes, maybe you shouldn't have interrupted that conversation and you should have waited your turn. That's something that you can take from this and an avenue of growth. But you're not going to spiral into all these things that you think that pastor was saying about you. You know where that narrative comes from? It comes from being in a space where my familial system was full of, when someone left the room, that was the opportunity to gossip about them. And it happened all the time. And so my narrative in my head is that when you leave the room, someone's going to say something negative about you. When you're not there, in your absence, comes the gossip. And so when I start to realize that that narrative has been told to me, then all the assumptions that I have about what's going on in his head and the conversations he's going to have when I leave are based on what happened to me in childhood, not based on who the man standing in front of me is. And so you have control to say, I will no longer go down this rabbit hole. It is not where I'm willing to be anymore. Because I no longer want to live the life of the character that I was created by the people who were in my formative years. And I don't have to believe the things that they told me because it's a limiting box. There's so many other things that I know to be true about me. And I want that character to be the character that is shown to the world, not suppressed because I'm afraid of all of the narratives that have been created from people prior to. Women are, and people, I shouldn't even just say women, it's people. People are told that their bodies are too big or their bodies are too small or their bodies are too soft or their bodies are too hard. There's never a good enough. So if you're listening to the narratives of everybody else, you're never going to be good enough because everybody's going to have a different narrative for who you should be and how you should be and what you should be. And so in an effort to live in peace with who you are crafted to be, you have to say, I'm wiping the slate clean of all of these narratives, one story at a time. It's not going to be a complete swiping of the slate. It's going to be one story at a time that I'm willing to stop the narrative, interrogate it, question it, and interrupt that pattern so that I can do something different. So your practice for this week is to think about one limiting belief that you have, something that you believe to be true about yourself because it was told to you about your worth or your ability and it no longer serves you. Write it down. Write down the origin. Where did it come from? And how has it shaped your choices? And then once you write that down, take a really good look at it. And then the next thing you're going to write is what choices you are committing to make in the future and what thoughts and beliefs and patterns have to be interrupted to make that happen. So the stories you've been told, the origin of those stories, what they've limited you from doing, and what you're committing to doing in the future, and the thoughts and patterns that you have to shift to make that happen. Because gone are the days where you are going to believe the story that you have been told. And present are the days where you are going to start drafting this current story with the author who created you and the person who knows exactly who they are. If this story resonated with you or this episode resonated with you, please like and subscribe to my channels. Follow me on all socials. Share this with other people because there are people walking in the world. I have seen it. I know it to be true. I know what it feels like because I just did it this morning and earlier this week, who are believing what has always been told to them, even though there are people like you around them that see the light in who they actually are. Don't be afraid to tell them. Don't be afraid to share this message with them so that they can break free from the bondage that they're experiencing and surrender that narrative to God so that He can tell them exactly who He crafted them to be. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.